2018. In OG, we have Capstone Pro M1. In OO, we have Acupuncture Works. In CG, we have Sick Duck. And in CO, we have Constitutionally Hong Kongers. My name is Amira. I'll be the chair for today. Judging with me are my friends. And just a few housekeeping. It's quite a cramped room, so please make sure that your phones are on silent. If you need to leave the room for some odd reason via the front door, don't. Right? There's a back door that's open there, but also just like keep your discussion to a minimum. Thank you. All right. Without further ado, I now invite the Prime Minister.
Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, today in Asian societies, families are disintegrating from extended families to nuclear families that live in busy city centers due to economic and opportunistic reasons, right? And generally, in this status quo, elderly usually stay at their own homes, separate to these families, or when they're bored, they'll go to visit their families, or many times they will request to live with their families. And as this new generations, we are confronted with the choice of whether to allow our parents to stay with us or send them to elderly homes. And today I'm going to be telling you why the stigmatization of outsourcing elderly care is wrong and regret it. And I'll be telling you the effects because this debate is about the welfare of families, specifically about elderly and the children. It is what I want to say to the opposition that this debate is not about the superiority of the types of care of these elderly homes. Instead, it is about the stigma and the effects of the welfare that it has on family. And today, I'm going to show you why we are the side that does that. So firstly, I'm going to go into two points, which is why we get the stigmatization. Firstly, I'm going to be talking about practicality, how it shackles children into these choices that they are forced to make, and how elderly also have different forms of care that they need, and therefore staying in their children's home are not the best types of care for them. Firstly, I want to go on to practical harms, right? Firstly, we see in many cases these children live in these city centers because they're there so they can go to work, for example, because they can have more opportunities. It is where all the jobs happen and all the opportunities they can have are there, right? So we see that a lot of times these children are working 9 to 5 jobs. They might be working 2 to 3 different kind of jobs, and at the end of the day, they still have to go back and check if their parents are okay and care for them. This is a lot of stress on the child, especially due to the fact that they're already stressed, they already have so much to do at work, and after work they still have to care for their parents. And not only that, it makes the living conditions a lot worse. For example, in Hong Kong, the housing is some of the most expensive in the world. People live in cage homes. And when you think about that, when I am a mother who's trying to take care of my children and my husband, and then I also have to try and help my mother and accommodate her in my room as well, I not only have to take care of my child, not only have to take care of my personal life, my job, but also take care of my mother. And not only that, because of her staying here, we are left in a smaller space and we are not able to live as fruitfully as we would have wanted. Next, when you have elderly staying at your home, okay, and for example, if I was an elderly and I saw my kid going out to work every day, saw my grandchildren going out to school every day, and all I did was kind of stay at home, maybe play some mahjong with some friends, right? You don't really have this greater sense of purpose. You kind of feel like you have nothing to do at home, right? You see your kids going out there chasing their dreams, and you're left at home, left to do nothing, right? And this is how we see there's a trend of depression in a lot of these cases because these elderly people feel like they have no sense of purpose. They feel like they have nothing to do. Otherwise, an elderly home, at least they have other elderly people to talk to them. They have activities. They have all these other things that these elderly homes can actually help them. And let me give you an example. So, for example, the suicide rates in Japan are quite high for elderly. And unfortunately, that may be a big factor is because a lot of these elderly people are unable to feel a sense of purpose.
Point.
No, thank you. Next, I want to tell you something else. So, a lot of these elderly, because of this, and because they're able to feel a sense of purpose, then they might try and get a job out of retirement. For example, take care of other people's kids or go drive a car. And obviously, if you're 80 years old, you are too old to drive a car for your own good, right? Your eyesight is bad, and a lot of other these things. And when these elderly people try and get a sense of purpose by getting other jobs that they are not equipped to do, this hurts their health and their well-being. And thirdly, third analysis is that elderly need different forms of care that me as a child cannot give to them. A lot of elderly people, for example, they use a wheelchair, they need a ramp, and a lot of houses it's not big enough or they don't have enough money to buy ramps. And next, for example, they need someone to change their diapers, for example, or help them bath. If I have a 9-to-5 job, I am unable to care for my mother when she needs to go to the bathroom. I am able to care for her when she needs to go back because I am busy working or busy taking care of my family or having my personal life. A lot of these elderly people have needs that I, as a child, cannot care for, cannot give her. And what is the consequences then, right? So even the people who are comfortable with going to elderly homes will then might be, the child will force them to kind of stay in their homes because they don't want to be stigmatized like this. So, right? And then we see that a lot of these elderly people will have a lot of these harms, for example, not having good quality of life and having a lot of health problems. But on the other hand, when elderly people just want to stay in their child's home, we also see these harms. Next, I'm going on to my second point, which is this motion shackles children into choices that they would not have otherwise made, okay? So for example, children are currently starting their lives, starting their jobs, right? They're going trying to get the most opportunities they can to help raise their own family and going to try and succeed economically, right? And a lot of times they're unable to do this to the greatest extent because they are forced to take care of the family because of the stigmatization that this motion will provide, right? We see that, for example, wait a minute. We see that, for example, if I am trying to get a job, but for example, that job requires me to work extra hours on weekends, work extra hours in the night, then I am unable to get that job because my mother is at home and she needs me to change her diaper. And because of that, I feel like I have the obligation because I'm stigmatized as well. Not only the obligation as a person in an Asian family, but also because of the stigmatization. I don't want other people to see me as someone who's incompetent and as someone who's shy. And let me give you the characterization of this word, right? In an Asian society, as a Chinese child myself, my mom always says, "How soon fu mo" in Cantonese, and that means to just listen to your parents and respect them, right? We have this whole kind of bubble, we have this culture which tells us you need to listen to your parents, and after they get old, you need to take care of them like they took care of you when you were young. And if you are unable to do so, you get shunned by society. You are told you are a bad child. You did not do your job. And because of this, a lot of children then get forced to allowing their parents to live with them, even though they know that that's not the best for them economically and not the best for their parents in the long run from the welfare. And next, I want to add on to the second layer of analysis, which is it takes a relationship with the parents. Right? In the worst case, when even in this society, when you are stigmatized and the child decides to send their parents to elderly care, then they're shunned by society, told that they're not a good child. Right? We see that this child has no incentive to go see their parents anymore. They're saying, okay, firstly, when I have to take care of you, you deny me of these opportunities that I have the right to and that I worked hard for. And secondly, now that when I really have no choice, I'm sorry, I have no choice and I have to put you there, people shun me and say that I am a bad child and then shun me out of society. So therefore, a lot of times, maybe these children might not want to even visit their parents in the future, and that has a greater harm. And because we are the side that shows you how we care about the welfare of families, specifically about the elderly people and their children, this is why this motion shall stand. Thank you very much.
I thank Prime Minister. Now welcome Leader of Opposition. Okay, what the PM says is,
she actually talked about we have to focus on the emotion, which is about stigmatization. But what have she told you was that she was putting an inferiority and superiority, which is the objective condition of what a parent should do or what not. We think that they are not doing their job, that they are burdening us to do. So having said that, we are going to make a big one rebuttal and then clarify all the arguments and then point by point. So firstly, we think that all of their arguments were one-liner, that those people does not have any resources to actually invest on their parents. So therefore, it is bad in order to stigmatize those people who had no choice. But we think that if their case is that makes no difference whether stigmatization exists or not. We think that those people who do not have the choice to do put resource in the first place will not actually change their metric to actually whether to outsource this elder care or whatnot. So therefore, we think that this stigmatization effect, we have to consider the changes that it brings, but we do not think that this change actually is brought to the government side, because they are going to send their parents to the elder care anyway, because they have no choice and more resources, and they believe that those kind of environments inside the retirement centers are superior to their home. So we think that those kind of metric will not change when the debate is about bringing change and bringing changes through whether the stigmatization should be regretted or not. Okay. One by one. Their first argument was that their children are too busy inside the school, so therefore they are too stressed to go to other homes. We think that stress cannot be a convenient excuse to throw away moral obligation that exists in the Asian cultures, which is linking to the first argument of our side, constructive argument of our side. And their second argument was about there is an objective condition of the homes, which is very, very worse. But we do not think that the objective conditions are something that the parents actually want. They actually want emotional support from their family, even if the condition is very, very worse. We think that parents are happy in itself seeing their children, even if it is 1 hour a day, we think that they are happy by themselves, which I'll further explain in the calculuses in the life goals of elderly people. And thirdly, they also talked about that they have nothing to do inside their home when the children are actually going to the businesses or whatnot, 9 to 5. We think that isn't that the happiness that parents actually pursue for their lifetime. We think that seeing those kind of children actually pursue their dreams, pursue their business, even if they are busy, we think that by seeing them, they actually have their goal. And we think that most of the elderly people are actually, with their remaining lifespan, we think that they actually are fulfilled and are happy with their seeing those kind of little amounts of time, even if it was very little. So, fourth thing that they talked about was that parents need different form of care, so people have to change the diapers, and so therefore they will hinder the children's life. We think that in that case we can employ a nurse, right? We think that that is kind of not mutually exclusive with our argument. We think that by at the same time, we can make them remain at home, and at the same time, we can employ the nurse to actually take care for the parents while those children are not in their home. We think that those kind of things are very, very different from sending those parents to the outsourcing and those kind of retirement centers, because we think that those kind of emotional support is the only mutually exclusive benefit coming from our side when the parents actually stay in their homes. Okay, having crossed out all their arguments, we are going to go on to our constructive. First about the principle level, and secondly about the practical changes that we are going to bring with this kind of stigmatization. So before that, we are going to set our stance clear. We are going to change the metric and calculus of the people who are able to care for the elderly but not doing it. Despite what the opening government said, the people who do not have resources and do not have any choice to actually send those kind of parents to the retirement centers. We think that we are the people, we are the only team targeting the people who are able to care for the elderly but not doing it. But before that, principle. We think that Asian culture and social structures influence each other. We think that Asian culture has a very unique and different characteristic compared to Western cultures. We think that there is a respect for the elderly in the Asian culture, and we think that that leads to because elderly has provided many things to children, compared to the United States, where people 60 years old or 20 years old actually are independent from their parents. We think that because of this culture mutually influencing with each other with social structure, we think that children, especially in Asian cultures, have received much from their family, even compared to the Western cultures. We think that that itself means that by principle of reciprocity, we think that their children has a moral obligation, despite all the stresses, all the inconveniences, those kind of not sending parents to their retirement centers actually cause. We think that they have a moral obligation in the principle level to actually keep them in their houses and provide them emotional and financial support. Having said that clear, going on to our practical, and which is the most important argument in this debate, which the opening government fully neglected. And before that, yes.
Okay, what if the parents, according to general standards, did not comply with how they should care for children? Do you still think that that child should still support their parent? Because under current status quo, regardless of what your parents do, you're expected to support them.
I think parents, or actually, if that's the case, if the children has acted not fully abiding the social thing, we think that the parents still have an obligation to actually care for their children, despite the fact that these children are actually malicious or actually like kind of juvenile criminals or whatnot. We think that that kind of argument is actually not going against the fundamental principle of moral obligation and principle of reciprocity. So practical argument. We think that elder care does not only contain the financial care and objective level of condition and support. We think that also includes the emotional care, and we think that is the most important thing that should be provided when we were to care for the elderly very, very much, because elderly has like a small remaining lifespan compared to other people. So therefore, this means that they have less choice to pursue their own dreams, pursue their own thing. We think that that means they have to pursue what they have done in the past, which is about raising the family. So therefore, we think that the life goal of the elderly is to look for those kind of families who she or he have grown up and actually see those kind of families actually succeed. We think that those kind of emotional care in those kind of retirement services, they have less of an incentive to care for this. Why? Because they have not seen the history of those elderly people growing up, and they have not made an emotional contact with them. Just by government supporting and just by government fund and just by like private fund actually making those kind of systems will not actually lead to emotional care by random workers actually working in there, random nurses actually working in there. We think that we are the only thing that provides those kind of emotional support. And why it's important, we think that also, even if they have dreams and try to pursue them, we think that the collection of elderly in one environment makes it harder for them to live their lives and pursue their own dreams, despite the fact that, like, regardless of the fact that most of elderly people are actually does not have like their own goal but rely on those kind of family goals. But even if they do, we think that because of the social narrative of seeing those retirement centers and seeing that those elderly are actually have done their job in their society, so therefore they or people to be cared, it makes it much more harder for them to pursue their own life goal, which Japan is currently doing. Like they also pursue their own career or whatnot. We think that also there's a limited resources in their retirement center. The people should receive enough like equal resources because they have sent those kind of retirement centers to the retirement centers. But if it is distributed very equally, we think that there is less of a chance for these people to pursue their goals, and we think that that should be only done by the family members, which have an incentive to provide emotional support. We are happy to propose.
I thank Leader of Opposition. Now welcome Deputy Prime Minister.
All right. I think we have to let go of the notion that you can only care for someone if they are around. Sometimes the best way to care for a person is to let that person go, especially when the circumstances are just not right anymore. This debate is not about whether or not these elderly people need emotional support, because yes, they do. But the question is, in which paradigm do you really get the best balance of all the kinds of support they need? Because come on guys, it's not really enough for our parents to see us 1 hour every day at home. I mean, when we get back to our own countries, our parents are going to be like, well, you're back for an hour and then you're going to be gone again. That's exactly the kind of rhetoric that happens within households every day. And we think that the more that parents do stay in our homes in an environment that we cannot give the full emotional and full physical support that is required for their kind of stature, then I think it's time for these particular young people to make that choice. I'm going to talk about three things in this debate. The first thing I want to talk about is the idea of resources. To some extent, we will agree, coming from opposition, that yeah, this debate is probably not about just the economic standing of people. But we have to go in the comparative, right? Because this debate is about the choices that people should be entitled to make. Because naturally, if there is a stigma, then that means in opposition, people are going to be, at the best case, highly encouraged to ensure that their families are at home. And I think they were quite unresponsive to a lot of the material coming from Evelyn as to why this is particularly harmful. The first thing that we talked about is the idea that there are a lot of people who cannot provide the time that is necessary to support the elderly parent. Because let's imagine, right? Naturally, these people would need people to talk to every day, because if they are depressed, for instance, it is important, it is vital that they have people to talk to. It's not enough for opposition to say that at least 1 hour they see their children growing up. It's the same reason why parents sometimes don't want us to leave because naturally they want to spend more time with these families. And this is something that, as Evelyn told you, we cannot accommodate considering that these young people are already starting out their lives, they're already starting their own families, they're starting out their careers, right? And that's why when it comes to even just the emotional support that they talked about, that's quite difficult to do considering that there's a possibility of resentment between the parents and the child, because the child thinks that I could have done more things with my time, I could have done more things, I could have achieved more goals in my lifetime. That's something that they will never be able to achieve due to this particular stigma. To which they said, well, it's not necessary for you to stay at home. You can always hire nurses. But the first thing that we will say is, this is actually more expensive than spending on a retirement home, Madam Speaker. In fact, we say that this is particularly harmful in a lot of Asian societies where there are more elderly people than young people, considering that if you wanted to stay in their homes and you have a nurse, that means that there's a 1-to-1 ratio when it comes to the nurse or the caregiver within that particular home. That means that firstly, obviously it's more expensive, and number two, assuming that what they really wanted was emotional support in order for these parents to interact, then that's contradictory to their stance, because naturally if you leave a caregiver at home, then these children will also still be entitled to thinking that, well, it's okay, there's a nurse anyway there. That also fails to address the point that Evelyn brought out, because more importantly, it's not just about whether or not someone cares for them, but more importantly, what kind of environment do we live in? We think that these elderly should not be able to stick to their homes alone. We think it's important that they build a community, and that can only happen in retirement homes when there are other people who also share their plight, who also share their same sentiments about being retired, who also share their sentiments about missing their grandchildren, or who can dance Zumba with them or aerobics on their free time. So what's the point, right? We say that the opportunity cost that comes with having your parents at home are time and resources. We agree that there will be families who are willing to accommodate their parents at home. But what we are saying, coming from opening government, is that there are lots of families out there who cannot afford the time and resources necessary to make sure that their parents live a well-balanced life at their homes. We think that the only way to empower them to make that choice is to make the playing field equal in terms of the choices that we're making. I.e., if there are some families who choose to send their parents to the retirement home, and if there are certain families who choose to send their parents back to their homes or have a caregiver, then that's fine. We say that the distribution is more equal on that side, on our side of the house, and that's why we think on the first level we're already winning the debate. Secondly, let's talk about emotional support, and this is where I want to delve deeper to the kinds of lives that the elderly are living, because we think it's quite a mischaracterization coming from opposition to say that these elderly people just need to see their children once a day, etc., etc. We think that we give you multiple levels of analysis as to why this isn't the case. The first thing that we talk to you about is assuming that these parents do stay in their house, do stay with their children, right? We think that the kind of emotional support is not good, particularly because if it is contrary to the choice that these children would have otherwise made, you have that area of resentment. And the thing is, resentment is particularly harmful because it takes an incredulous amount of patience in order for you to deal with the elderly, considering that the issues that they have are largely different from young people. So if you have resentment and you're just giving an hour of your time, the chances are these elderly people still feel the fact that they are burdens. And we think that them feeling that they are burdens is something that's more harmful to the kind of lives they're living. That's why they feel they're forced to go into jobs. And sometimes in a lot of communities, in more developing nations, right, there are also these elderly people who try to get into jobs that don't have proper regulations, because naturally they're retired, there aren't that much regulations for the kinds of industries that they get into, or worse, right, they get themselves, they get into depression, or they further feel the fact that they are useless because every day they see their children living the lives that they're living. We think that children know their parents best, and that's why when they think that their parents are better off in a retirement home, we think that's a much better environment in order for them to live in. But on worst case, right, we think that currently there are still children who send their parents into retirement homes. The harm there is the moment that you leave your parent in the retirement home and you know that there is stigma, there is no incentive for you to visit your parents because you are scared that people will see you visiting your mother at a retirement home. You're scared of the stigma, and that's why we have a lot of parents who spend their lifetime in retirement homes without any visits from their families. We think that regardless of what choices people make when it comes to how to to take care of their elderly. It's important to make sure that the support structures are equal, and that only happens in a world where there is no stigmatization. But we think on a principled level, this directly clashes with the point that was brought out by opposition, right? We think that the moral obligation to physically care for your parents is actually an arbitrary concept. Firstly, because there is no reciprocal obligation for care. Number one, the first basis of caring for your parents is the fact that you were born to them. That's not something we chose. We didn't get to choose to be born. But more importantly, our parents already got government benefits, the fulfillment that comes with letting us grow. We think that there is no solid logical reason for the obligation to be imposed in these particular cultures. And in that particular circumstance, it's important for people to be able to opt in and out of this option, and that can only happen in a world where there is no stigmatization. If you are going to forward the choice of these families, if you will allow them to develop their own lives in the manner that they find more applicable to them, then side with opening government. Thanks.
I thank Deputy Prime Minister and I invite Deputy Leader of Opposition.
I'll talk about what's relevant to this motion regarding my life first before I actually move on, right? Madam Speakers, I took the national scholastic exam that happens once a year, 3 times. That's why I'm labeled samsuseng. And I think this is a prevalent concept that also happens in Japan. You have national examination exams that happen once a year, right? During that period, my parents paid shitloads of private education money. And I think that this is a problem that happens not just in South Korea, the country that I come from. I think this is a problem that exists in Japan. I think this is a problem that exists in China. Many nations in Asia where competition in the scholastic academic level is very, very high. Madam Speaker, we think that parents in the current status quo have faced ever high costs of paying off their mortgage, ever higher cost of education, investment bubbles in the real estate market, the ever high rate of unemployment, the perception prevalent in many Asian communities that parents need to provide for their child when they get married, and like for instance, buying a house for their child. There's a narrative in these Asian communities that parents need to provide money for these people and aid these people, aid their children in buying a house and buying household facilities when they get married, right? That's why I think that parents are facing a burden, right? And that they cannot actually ignore, and I think that they concede to this issue to a certain extent. That's why their PM's counterfactual, which was mentioned in the 34th second of her speech, that these elderly people can choose to live in separate houses that they own. I think that own and buy when they're old. I think this is a counterfactual that's fundamentally impossible to begin with, and that's not a normative situation to begin with, right? So I think that this debate needs to be about retirement homes, and I think the Deputy Prime Minister of their case actually shifted to this counterfactual in the end, right? So let's talk about elderly homes, because I think this is the most relevant issue, right? Okay, number one, I think that if their issue, because their case was contingent upon the idea that it shackles personal choice. Individuals are so busy, lead hectic lives, they don't have the time and resources to provide for their parents and whatnot. Okay, number one, I understand that there are families in the status quo who have no choice but to send their parents to elderly care facilities. I understand in certain cases, these families are economically, time-wise pressed to provide adequate care. But that's not the debate. If it's the case these people have absolutely no choice but to do so, society and surrounding people and even the parents would understand them. They would not, and therefore these children would not be victimized by the stigma that they try to actively say. They didn't even actually tangibly describe to us what and how these stigmas will demonize these people to begin with. Because I think that this is a debate about stigma, right? As they were so contingent upon. In which case, I think they need to specifically impact and tell us what is the harm that actually is inflicted upon these people. I think they never do that in this debate. Because if that is the debate, then the contention in this debate should be If a person has the time and resources to care and provide for the elderly parents, yet he makes the choice of sending their parents to a facility, please sit down, should there be a stigma to stop them, or at least a stigma that sparks their guilt, so that maybe, just maybe, he takes that decision back. They need to defend the idea that this stigma shouldn't exist. We need to defend the idea that we need this extra push. By the way, it's not a magnetic pull. These stigmas don't force these people to care for their elderly. It's one of the influences that happen in society, and in which case, if it's circumstantial, everyone will understand the very society that stigmatizes people will lift these stigmas. Because I don't think stigmas are applied to everyone to the exact same extent, right? Circumstances are considered. I think that that's why their case has fundamentally no impact in this debate. Before I move on, yes?
Okay, if stigma is just one of the many influences that exist, what is the impetus for people to ensure that your benefits of emotional support will happen?
Okay, impetus of people for the emotional support is that I think that these people are naturally incentivized, one, because I don't necessarily think that their characterization that these kids are always resentful of their parents stand to begin with. But number two, I think that it is obligatory to a certain extent, because I have mentioned to you the characterization and contextualization under which parents actually do economically, tangibly contribute to the independent living of their child, in which case I think that they do have a tangible obligation, regardless of the birth-given responsibilities that they're so dependent upon, right? So let's look at their case also. They told you that elderly homes provide better welfare, they can build communities there. Look, regarding the community issue, although I really don't think that is an important issue in this debate, look, you have elderly communities in residence areas where children and their elderly parents live together, right? So it's not as if communities or forming communities is an exclusive benefit on their model to begin with. But number two, if you're so concerned about the welfare of these elderly people, then give them the choice, right? The case where elderly, we have no problem in the case where elderly have enough money to buy themselves a home and hire a nurse and choose to live by themselves, in which case a stigma wouldn't exist to begin with, right? In most cases though, parents choose to stay with their children regardless of this thing. And this is the impact of Chion's argument, in that I think you cannot simply brush off the emotional support that these children actually provide to these parents and say that it's just, it's just something that happens. It shouldn't really be prioritized. I think that this is a tangible benefit and utility that's not numerically measurable, sure, but is a tangible factor that actually contributes to these parents wanting to stay home with their children. In which case, I don't think that they have the right to simply come in and butt in and say that that utility is not important. Who are they to say that to begin with? Because they're not really parents, right? But if they're so concerned about the life quality of children who grow to be adults, then my question then again is, how does getting rid of the stigmatization solve their problem, right? Because if the stigma is lifted under their as they say under their analysis, still I think that people would feel a moral obligation to pay back to their parents what they actually received to begin with, right? In which case I think that if it's not this stigma, that this exact stigma that incentivizes these children to contribute to their parents, there will be other stigmas generated in their place to pressure or actually, influence these children to take care of their parents. In which case, I think that the unique benefit, impact of this stigma existing is actually low on their side to begin with. So let's conclude my speech. Number one, I think that child's obligation to raise or provide adequate care for their parents is not just something emotional and moral, but of course it's one of the major factors. But number two, it's considered the economic contributions that these parents tangibly give to them even when they're adults, not just in the adolescent era. But number two, I think that they never really proved to you how stigma actually demonizes these people, which in case of really uncontrollable circumstances, the stigma will be lifted and won't be sufficiently suppressing these people to begin with. But number three, I think stigmas will be replaced by another stigma, not even remotely relevant to this, and actually press these people anyway. In which case, I think that OO takes this debate because OG is out.
I thank opening house. I now invite the member of government.
It's ironic to see in the first speech where they talk about they're going to focus on stigmas, but nonetheless we hear nothing about stigmas. We think the entirety of this debate has largely been contingent on is it better to send your parents to an elderly home or is it better to let them stay at home, right? We think that first of all, in this big clash in opening house, we don't think this is entirely relevant to the point of the debate itself. Because first of all, we think it's a very individualistic thing that you have to take care of, and it depends upon the parent, it depends upon the relationship of the family. It's not something that can be broadly generalized, and something you can say works for all things. Nonetheless, we acknowledge the burden that opening opposition puts on us by saying why resource-rich people, when they put their parents in their homes, why they should not be stigmatized. This is a burden that we'll address later on in our extension. But as we see, when there's a lot of practical harms coming from opening half, which are not entirely irrelevant, but nonetheless, we think that we as closing government will be the ones to connect the dots for you and tell you on the principle level why we as closing government take this debate home, because we take to home the principle of what is happening with the stigmatization. So obviously we think that first of all, a couple of things that we want to do today is first of all clarify to you what exactly these stigmatizations are, never clear to you by opening half. Second of all, why these stigmatizations are bad, and last of all, why these stigmatizations are legitimate, right? So going back to the concept of free speech, something that opening government brings up but never really clearly characterizes to you. We think that free speech and stigmatization are something that can coexist. For example, if you're a racist and you make racist remarks, we think that the backlash of society saying that you're racist and therefore treating you a different way is something that is legitimate. But nonetheless, we think there are two conditions in which we can accept stigmatization and free choice. First of all, when we cannot accept stigmatization and free choice. First of all, do these actions provide practical harm to the people who are actively being stigmatized? And second of all, is the stigmatization correct? We think which is the more core principal point of whether we can have if these stigmatizations are correct or not. Yes.
There's regular stigmatization of certain behaviours that may be deemed as immoral or unjust, even if it's not criminal. Would you support the stigmatization of behaviour and conduct seen as socially undesirable and immoral in that sense?
We don't think, well, this is going to go back to our main point. I think our main argument will address this, but we don't think it's necessarily a matter of being socially desirable or whatnot. We think this is something that's entirely different. So let's go back to our extension. So first of all, what are the extensions that we're specifically talking about here in this debate? We think that this mainly goes under two actors. First of all, the children themselves. We think that the stigmatization is that once you send your parents or your loved ones to an elderly home, we think that first of the stigmatization is an assumption that you cannot love or that you are immoral from the get-go. We think that first of all is extremely harmful, which will later on be elaborated. But second of all, we think that there's a large emphasis that not only are you immoral, but you're extremely selfish and careless as well. That you don't care enough and you only care about yourself. We tell you that extends from the harm away from the family and affects not only your family but also your other lives as well, which we think is illegitimate. But furthermore, we tell you that stigmatization exists on the elderly side as well, because once you're sent away to an elderly home, or even if you decide on yourself to go, nonetheless, it is the rumors within Asian societies, it is the speculations within Asian societies that perhaps that your children did something wrong, that you didn't properly educate them, for instance, that you didn't feel your basic responsibility to be a true parent, and you're not truly a devoted parent at that. So why are these stigmatizations particularly harmful from the get-go? We tell you that first of all, that these are judgments of character, which means that there's something that will stick with you, and no matter who you are, the type of appearance, or whatever car or house you buy, these are, at the end of the day, it's going to be a judgment on your character. And why is a judgment on your character especially harmful? We tell you that as an individual, when you're judged to be careless or selfish, that extends far beyond the family realm, far beyond your personal life, but affects also other realms of life, such as your work life. If you're judged to be careless and selfish because it's something that you did in a personal relationship with your family or friends, we think that's entirely legitimate when that comes over and starts affecting other realms of your life as well. We tell you in Asian societies, especially when these Confucian values of respecting your parents is held very highly, it is inevitable when you start going against the social norm that these types of judgments of characters will expand past the family, but also judge your character and any type of other realms of life, and therefore limiting your opportunities overall. And furthermore, we tell you that because of that, you have strained extended family connections, another important aspect of Asian cultures, but also there's strained connections in general, which also, especially in Asian society, which is not as bureaucratical as Western society, we think which is extremely important in how you're perceived in a socioeconomic level when you have strong connections which are proven by your character itself. So moreover, let's go back to then, when is stigmatization acceptable? We tell you it's not acceptable when they have when you produce active harms that affect these people. Something that we already elaborated to you just now. But moreover, we think that it's especially not acceptable when the stigmatization itself is not correct. So what we're talking about is that are these children necessarily selfish? Are these children necessarily careless and immoral and cannot give love? And are these elderly necessarily bad parents? It's because they were sent away to an elderly home, or because their children decided to send them away to an elderly home. So first of all, we tell you that actions in themselves cannot, first of all, we did tell you that it's a little illegitimate for society to judge a very personal relationship because they don't have the full details on that. And especially because a family relationship, which has very personal details where you can never truly know the entire situation, that we tell you that exclusive judgment is reserved to the parents and the children as to what their relationship is. But moreover, we tell you that actions themselves are not something that you can solely base what a parent-child relationship is upon. The very same way that when you go through, when teenagers go through puberty and start not listening to the parents and wrecking their cars by going out late at night, we tell you that that is not equivalent to this type of love that they show for their parents as well. We tell you that even when parents sometimes neglect their children by accident because they're so busy at work or whatnot, that is also not reflective of their love. So we think that the entire premise coming from opposition, that your actions are a reflection of your love, is not necessarily true from the get-go. So, especially in a parent-child relationship. And moreover, we think that even if you're failed, and even if they're correct, and that actions do prove, to a certain extent, what you are as a child, and do prove your moral character to a certain extent, we don't think that this necessarily should be driven to the extremes that Asian societies do. Because as I told you before, the judgment of character is the relationship between you and your parent is judged as the primemost example of what your character should be. You're judged as a human in the way how you treat your parents. And therefore we think that even if you're not an ideal child, even if you're not an ideal son or daughter, that shouldn't be something that limits you later on in life, and that shouldn't be something that restricts you from the choice of what your family should resolve in the very first place. So what are we getting back at? We're talking about free choice here. And we're talking that free choice at the end of the day is, even if there's stigmatization, can only be legitimate when stigmatizations are correct and when these stigmatizations are extremely don't cause extreme harm to the people who are receiving these stigmatizations. In that case, I think we successfully proved to you why, in that case, opening house suddenly becomes relevant in terms of how their harms link back to how we make choices and how free choice can only be achieved when the stigmatization is gone from the get-go. Closing government and private representative. Thank you.
I thank member of government. Now welcome member of opposition.
Three things in my speech today. First of all, on why, given that there are other coercive pressures that imply that outsourcing of care for your parents would happen in the majority of cases anyway, it is better to have a unique stigma attached to it because guilt motivates political capital for better elderly care. 2. A specific principle concerning why you have an obligation to actually stay and keep your parents at home, because everything O talked about only shows that you ought to pay for your parents, not you ought to spend time with them in your family. But thirdly, what is so unique about the presence of children, and this directly deals in a comparison with institutions and elderly homes, and I'm going to explain to you why the structurally coercive factors that render them undesirable. First, I want to just be very clear, because I think this debate is really confusing, because one team needs to come up here and say, what is the most likely scenario that this debate actually matters in, right? Because I want to observe that to the extent that all of OG's characterization and CG's observations that the cost to the individuals are true, these are likely to be cases where outsourcing happens anyway. I know O said this, I want to explain to you why, because note, the motion says this is one stigmatizing narrative. What it doesn't say it is the only stigmatizing narrative. We think there are 5 countervailing norms that mean that you still outsource your parents to elderly institutions in a vast majority of cases. 1, economic rationality, because you don't have time to take after them, have to spend more time working to earn an income like your job and whatnot. 2, individual autonomy, an embrace of freedom and the importance of autonomy in a fragmented world as observed by PM, where there's a decline in nuclear families. That was Malaysia round 2, by the way, I think. Where there's a decline in nuclear families, and this is a norm that exists on both sides. Thirdly, because people often prioritize their self-interest, like having space to live in, income, and whatnot, as more important than their parents, right? It is that trade-off that also means in cage homes and things you're talking about in OG, you don't get that self-crushing harm they talked about on OG. Fourthly, because people care more about, in general, in a community and whatnot, how well you're doing economically and socially than how you're dealing with your parents. And this deals with all the stuff they say about communities judging you really heavily, because they will judge you more at the point when you can't afford to have a job or pay for your mortgage and whatnot, because you have to cover your parents' income by having them live in your house. Fifthly, because people care about their parents at the end of the day in vast majority of cases. If you think your parents are not happy, if you think your parents are unable to experience these opportunities, if you genuinely know because you interact with them on a day-to-day basis that they're not leading good lives when spending time with you, that is when you would outsource them to the institutions anyway. Why does this matter? This matters because that means that for a large majority of the harmful scenarios OG talked about, there's a symmetry and there's outsourcing anyway, but if anything, we get better outcomes for the elderly. This is a unique extension. Here's why. One, notice that precisely because of the stigma, you get a sense of guilt, that you feel you've done something wrong when you outsource your parents to an elderly institution. But two, there's also a sense of public guilt, that the public, when they see people like elderly living in these elderly institutions, they think this is a social problem they ought to care about and whatnot. Why is this important? Because know that in a case where political agenda is often fragmented and, fundamentally chaotic, which side captures the most salience and attention and ability to appeal to people's moral calculus is the side that gets the most resources and benefits to the elderly. We think you get more political capital to care for the elderly on two fronts. One, in terms of interactions and non-political context, we think that children are more likely to make up for that on the basis of the guilt by interacting with their parents, by visiting the elderly homes, by spending more time with them to ensure that they feel comfortable whilst at these elderly homes. Now, OG quite cleverly preempts this of saying, but you get shamed. Look, that doesn't make sense because it is not true that society doesn't follow you around and see when and how you visit the elderly homes. That's just an implausible characterization because we don't live in a common village. We live in a society where you can go to an elderly home and not be seen by people you know because there's something called common sense. Now, second response here though, is I think you also get more political capital on three levels. One, motivating things like better pensions and payment for the elderly, because when you feel that your elderly are removed elsewhere because of capitalism and the chains and constructs of that sort, that's when you care more about increasing the amount of money you get after retirement. Two, post-retirement re-education classes, because you think that you want them to experience more opportunities and autonomy when you deprive them by outsourcing them. That's why you get more coverage for them. Now, PM says, no, but it's really bad if you work as an elderly. We think you can choose as an elderly person. It's unclear why there's structurally coercive norms that is uniquely asymmetrical on their side. That's why PM's claim doesn't stand. But finally, we uniquely claim the past 30 years of benefits, because note this is a regrets motion, and uniquely what is motivating so much concern for the elderly over the past 30 years across Asian societies is not the filial piety norm. It is a sense of guilt, of remorse, of abandonment, and that is why you get more benefits for the elderly overall. Second point, principle. So, OG says you hurt children, CG added a few layers to that quite nicely. O says, well, you have reciprocity. But no one ever told me why specifically you need to stay home with your parents, right? Like obviously, everything O says can be discharged by, paying elderly homes. Why not? Here's why you uniquely need a specific form of reciprocity, and this is kind of like the argument that Fanelli ran in like the Thessaloniki round concerning African Americans needing a separate nation. It's the uniqueness of that reciprocity that matters, right? Because it is the emotional labor that your mother cared for you and spent time caring for you even after you reach adulthood that you're now compensating by caring after them. It is the fact that they organize and rearrange their own autonomy and objectives in life in order to care for you. That means you have to reciprocate by rearranging your own objectives and priorities in life. It is the fact that they spend so much time seeing you as a valuable individual that leads to the necessity of reciprocity here. This is not contingent upon outcomes here, because this is a particular insistent moral obligation that you're violating on your side. Then they say, but you don't choose your parents. Here's the response. Parents also don't choose who you are. They can never choose the peculiarities and specialties of whom you are as individuals. They also don't choose the fact that you're mischievous or rude or loud or debaters that never spend time with their family or grandparents and whatnot because they're off debating in Kyushu or something, right? That fundamentally means that this lack of choice means that coerciveness demands a reciprocal obligation in that sort. Then final response here is a bit of weighing up, because I agree that there is psychological harm on children, but I also think the harm on elderly also matters here. Three reasons why the elderly matter more. One, they lack political power or the ability to mobilize and unionize because they often don't have the physical health or the ability to do so, to lobby for politicians. But two, they're also economically dependent, because unlike those who can work, they don't have the ability to work in a post-retirement society secondly, what is an imposition concerning mandatory retirement age. But thirdly, this is also for the very simple reason that there is an exist prior moral obligation. That means you care more about the elderly than your children in this instance. Thirdly, on elderly institutions, we think there's structural reasons why they're uniquely coercive. One, profit incentives mean that they often have a cut corners and prioritize spending time on paying wages and minimizing the likelihood of maximizing quality of life for people. Two, the expenses required means that there's often an oligarchy in the provision of these services, so there is no competition that allows you to move from one elderly home to another, especially in the vast majority of cases where capitalism means that individuals have to spend hours and hours working and don't have the ability to necessarily therefore deal with choosing and picking elderly homes. But finally, we also know that in order for class action lawsuits and things to go through in ensuring accountability, the elderly don't have the visibility. And this is uniquely something you only get on our side when you spend time with the families, you point to the family and say, this is the elderly of your family, and for all of these reasons I'm so proud to oppose today. Thank you.
I thank member of opposition. Now I invite Government Whip.
I think closing opposition just misunderstood what our members told you, right? Because we think that stigma and guilt is different. Stigma is when the society judges you, and guilt is when you judge yourself. So, in this case, we think that guilt happens even happens on our side of the house with, when they actually claim that guilt is such an important thing, right? We see that guilt happens on our side of the house, but what we do not want is the society judging you, because the society is not fully capable of understanding the, like, I don't know, the backgrounds or the history of your family or whatnot, and that is the reason why we do not think that stigma is a desirable thing to go into today's debate, right? And secondly, they say that, okay, we, like, there is a general principle of reciprocity, and that the children have a duty to actually make up for it, right? However, we don't see the exclusive reason why this kind of making up mechanisms have to be exclusively reliant on this kind of form of mechanism, right? We see that there are a lot of alternatives in which you can actually make up for all of the like emotional duties that your parents have actually given to you, right? We say that you can visit your parents like more frequently than usual. Secondly, you can give them more financial support. We don't necessarily see why these outsourcing elderly care is the exclusive way to actually make up for all of the compensations for your parents, right? And thirdly, they talk about emotional labors, right? The entire opposition bench talk about emotional labors, right? But here's the problem: when you actually when you actually have your parents inside your households, and the parent and the children is automatically burdened, is higher burdened than usual, we think that that is the moment when emotional relationships is actually hard, right? Because now children are more burdened with other things rather than more urgent things like livelihoods or taking care of their own children, right? We think that when you're actually burdened on another layer of burden, that is the moment when emotional relationships is actually harmed on their side of the house, right? However, secondly, even if emotional relationships are actually do actually happen on their side of the house, we think that we can also achieve emotional relationships on our side of the house, right? Because if their only mechanism of emotional relationships being sustained is actually frequently interacting with your parents and children, we think that that can also happen by visiting your parents more occasionally or whatnot, right? We don't think that that is a mutually exclusive reason for them to come into today's debate, right? Now moving on to two of my clashes. First of all, the principle of free choice and why is so important, and secondly, on the practical level, why stigmatization is so harmful to begin with. First of all, about the principle of free choice. What does the entire opposition bench tell you, right? They talk about the idea of reciprocity and the duty of the children, right? However, what did closing government exclusively bring to you in today's debate? We brought to you the new principle of the idea of free choice. Why do we say we say that respecting free choice is of course as important as respecting the idea of reciprocity. But then we think that we have to look into the context of these Asian societies that we're talking about, right? In these Asian societies, we think that the most prevalent ideology in these Asian societies is the idea of Confucianism. This idea of Confucianism basically defines your identity based on your relationship with your family members, right? But then at this point, when you actually stigmatize all of these people who actually send your elderlies to, like, I don't know, like these kind of facilities, that is the moment when you are not respected of your free choice, because we want to respect these people who actually want to whether or not want to send your elderlies to these facilities, or rather want to keep them in your house. We think that is the more important idea rather than the idea of reciprocity, and we think the idea of reciprocity is even kept in our side of the house and is not really mutually exclusive to their side of the house. So we think that on this clash, we think that the idea of free choice is a much important thing to actually discuss about. No, thank you, sir. Secondly, about the idea of stigmatization, I already told you about the status quo and why, and about the Asian societies and the prevalence of these Confucianism ideologies, right? And at this point, what does the opposition talk about? Like the entire opposition bench talk about? They say that stigma is only one of the factors actually that influences the calculus or the incentive of these families, how these families operate, right? However, we don't think that is necessarily the case, right? Because in these Asian societies, where Confucianism ideologies are so prevalent, we think that social peer pressures, such as respecting the opinions of your neighbors or respecting the opinions of the entire society, is a really significant factor in actually discerning your behaviors within the society or your other roles within the society, right? We say that in this case, the impact of stigmatization is really high to an extent that crosses the appropriate level of criticism, or I don't know, like opinions or feedbacks that you would originally have deserved, right? We think that is the case that we even want to go for. No, thank you, sir. So, then what do we tell you on our side of the house, exclusively, right? We told you the different types of stigmas that would be guaranteed, that would be endowed upon to these children and elderly. First of all, the children, and secondly, the elderly, which my member has already elaborated to you, right? Then, when this happens, we think that this does not, these kind of things do not actually apply to the standards of when our stigmas. When we do not accept stigmas, right? Because we think that stigmas are not acceptable when, first of all, they actually provide practical harms to the society and on an individual level, and secondly, when they are not correct, right? However, we think that opposition's case is actually applicable for both sides, right? First of all, we think that practical harms have already been proved by both the opening government and closing government, right? And secondly, are these stigmas actually correct to begin with, right? I think that my member has already clearly told you that these kind of stigmas are not necessarily correct to begin with. First of all, we don't think that actions themselves are not necessarily the standard of discerning whether you're actually selfish or actually caring for your elderly. And secondly, we think that your family, you yourself know your family the best. Which means that the society do not really have the capability to judge whether you're actually appropriately catering to the needs of your parents appropriately or not, right? We think that you are the one who actually knows that the best, and not the society. At the end of the day, what is the principle that we have to uphold in today's debate? We want to uphold the principle of free choice, of guaranteeing the free choice of whether selecting to send your parent to these kind of facilities or actually keeping them home. And secondly, we don't think that a lot of the benefits will stand on their side of the house, and rather we think that the harms are so significant on their side of the house rather. And because of all these reasons, we are very comfortable.
I thank the government whip. Now the final speaker, opposition whip.
So as horrible and imperfect as we are, our parents raised, fed, cared for us, they put up with us, and they stuck with us, and now we're all in this group. I think this debate is about how we take care of our parents, the extent to how responsibilities we have, the extent to which they exist, and how far do they extend, how do we realize these responsibilities. But what the important question in this debate that has been missing by some teams is what is stigma? What does stigma do? Because what we claim from closing opposition and up bench is that stigma is not a gun at your head that forces you into certain decisions. Rather, it is a sense of guilt, duty, and wrongness on a personal and societal level that induces individuals to go above and beyond what they normally would do because they're afraid of personal guilt, because they're afraid of societal shame. That's why under our side of the house, even if parents go to elderly care homes, it is far better regulated. These homes are probably far better scrutinized under our side of the house. What am I going to do today? 3 things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about OG's lack of emotional understanding and lack of a counterfactual. Then I'm going to talk about closing government's canned arguments about why judgment is good, bad and choice is good. And then we're going to talk about and why they're okay. So firstly, why does OG lose out in this debate? I think PM's speech was largely non-comparative to the counterfactual. PM's speech, I'm very sorry, but was largely about why some families literally cannot take care of their elderly parents. In those situations, probably you would be putting your parents to elderly care homes. I think this is very reasonable if you literally cannot take care of them. The only difference is, under our side of the house, you have mechanisms of scrutiny. Under their side of the house, you'd push your parents to the elderly care homes, and then you wouldn't think about them at all. But under our side of the house, because of stigma and guilt, you are more likely to visit your parents. You're more likely to think about what's happening. Because you feel ashamed from society shaming you about your decision, you would try to put your parents in better elderly care homes instead of putting them in any care home at all. But secondly, the actual things that they did say in PM that was harmful was the harm about how, home is much better because the elderly are bored. The response to this, if elderly are bored, then probably elderly would choose to opt in to go to these elderly care homes. But the fact is, these care homes would therefore be much better regulated and scrutinized. But secondly, the idea about if parents are at home, there's scrutiny and pressure for parents, an abusive lifestyle. Firstly, I think this is mitigated by the fact the unique responsibilities Brian gave you in his speech. Secondly, it's mitigated by the fact that the families who are able to keep their parents at home are probably the families who are able to have the financial luxuries of doing so. Probably many of those harms are not important. But finally, even if it does exist, I think you need to weigh whether the responsibilities, the heaviness of having to take care of your parents is outweighed by the fact that you're pushing them to care homes that may be abusive, that may be far from perfect. So what are the 2 points that from opening government that meaningfully engage with the correct contextualization, the important weighing? 2 things. Firstly, they tell us that the distribution is more equal to their side of the house without guilt. 2 reasons. Firstly, what O says is no stigma equals balance. I think we improved this in Brian's speech, where we tell you just exactly why in the status quo there is more pressure to not keep your parents at home. The fact that putting your parents in elderly care homes is much easier than putting your parents in your room or putting your parents in your house means that you're more stigmatized not to put them in your home. So if there's any balancing factor, the balancing factor is that the stigma is what not send them to elderly care homes is what balances the decisions that you're making. But secondly, the harms of leaving, and this response is important. They say, well, if you are stigmatized, then you're going to be scared to visit. That's why all our benefits don't exist. You're not going to help out. Two responses. Firstly, this is obviously case by case. Like some individuals will lie to everyone, some individuals will be truthful, but the truthful individuals will now be forced to try to justify the decision that they're making by saying, look, I put them in a very good elderly care home. Look, I'm visiting them every week. Yes, there is stigma and shame, but here are the ways I try to deal with it because I have no other choice. I can't keep my parents at home. But secondly, I think stigma is also felt from the parent to the child. You can't hide from your parents the fact that you put them in elderly care homes, which means the parent is going to be shaming you, which means that the parent is going to call your aunt, your other relatives, your friends, their friends. All these people will know that you're doing this thing, which means that now you will feel impetus and forced into having to go try to put your parents into better situation in care homes or try to scrutinize and try to make this much better. But secondly, going on to CG. What does CG tell us? They tell us 2 things. That judgment is bad and that choice is good. When it comes to judgment, firstly they respond to all of our points by saying shame doesn't equal guilt, which is just not true. You need shame to have guilt. That's why our mechanism exists. But when it comes to the idea that judgment is wrong as a whole, firstly we reject this, because judgment is society's ability to nudge desirable behaviors that are either immoral or unwanted, but not necessarily illegal. That's why in this situation, the stigma and judgment forced by societies is to try to get children to the much better thing. But secondly, we pointed out that this is quite necessary, because without it, you'd be putting parents in shelter that you wouldn't necessarily be caring. But what does Brian tell you why elderly homes are much, much worse? 2 reasons. Firstly, because when it comes to things like health or mental care, children are most equipped to be able to take care of their parents. So even in situations where there are no choices and the parent does have to stay in the child's home, then that's still far better in our situation, because we say there's far better, higher level of care. But secondly, we say that because elderly homes are obviously profit-seeking entities, they'll court corners if they know that the children don't care and aren't going to visit. If they know that children feel guilty, if they know that society as a whole has a negative view of elderly care homes, and that there will be much more outrage when abuses happen, that means there's much more incentive for elderly care homes to be more careful about the kind of policies that they're enacting. I think this is very important mechanisms that have never been responded to by closing government. Finally, on the idea of scrutiny, we say 3 things. Firstly, that it's much better for because there's, firstly we said that there's going to be demand for betterment for the individuals. Secondly, we said that there's going to be guilt felt by the individuals. Therefore, we're going to put them in much better homes if you choose to do this. And finally, because of societal scrutiny, we're going to try to enact much better ideas. Finally, on the idea of choice. They say choice is important, but choice goes both ways. So the choice of the parent who wants to stay at home also exists, which means that they can't just claim this. They have to understand that this debate is a way, that the stigma is what uniquely balances the imbalance of power between parents and children to make these kind of decisions, which is why the choices are probably far better actualized and far more equalized under our side of the house. Finally, what do we say differently from OO? What OO basically says is that why homes are good. It's non-comparable why elderly care is so terrible. So firstly, this is exactly what we did in our extension. But secondly, we told you why elderly care will improve under our side of the house. Because stigma, self-checking, the greater scrutiny due to society, all these are benefits that mechanize our goals. But secondly, when Diallo tells us that stigma equals balance, I think we told you why stigma is important in trying to create much more equal situations. At the end of this debate, I don't think any team can prove that all parents will go to elderly care homes or all parents will stay at home. The only thing that a team can do is show what kind of imbalances exist in society, what kind of stigma corrects for these imbalances. I think that was precisely done on Closing Opposition. Very proud to oppose.
I thank all teams who may cross the floor, and the judges will head out to deliberate. Thank you.